Welcome to It's a Sublime Life. Inspiration on living an excellent life and seeing the beauty already in life. You can find It's a Sublime Life on most social media platforms. Just search for It's a Sublime Life. Welcome to It's a Sublime Life. I'm your host, Hayley. We have today Dr. Jason Spendelow, who's a clinical psychologist and coach. You do your work online and in person, in groups, I think I've read as well, workshops that you do. Now, I've had a look over your website and LinkedIn profile. We've only spoken before for just a couple of minutes, then a couple of emails to and fro in. But I think what really stands out about yourself is your kindness, compassion, consideration. I'll just read one of your clients' sort of quotes that you use on your website. Jason knows his stuff. He's also one of the nicest, warmest people I've ever met. The tools he taught me really work. I feel like you're just this comfortable blanket. And if I was your client, we would just, I'd sit there in my blanket and we'd just work things out together. So that's what impression I get. Did you always know that this is what you wanted to be? Because it seems to so well suit your personality.
Yeah, I'm not sure really. I think when I went through university, I started off doing economics as a major. And after my first year of university, I thought, okay, this isn't quite right. So I'd thrown in a first year undergraduate psychology paper into my degree. And I thought, okay, let's do a bit more psychology. And I think just over time, I gravitated more and more in that direction. And once I did my master's degree, then I was thinking very seriously about clinical training. And I thought I'd just kind of go for it and see if I got in. I applied to a program back in New Zealand where I trained. And I got in. And so things just kind of kept moving in that direction rather than having a kind of a moment and kind of an aha moment where I thought, okay, this is what I want to do for a job. I think I just kind of keep going. Yeah, okay. And of course, clinical psychologist, it's a lot more training, for example, than a counsellor, isn't it? It's you've done 9 years of training. And am I right in thinking also that a clinical psychologist, there's a difference between a clinical psychologist and a straightforward psychologist? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different kind of flavours of psychologist. You can have developmental psychologists or organisational psychologists, and then you have clinical psychologists. So, yeah, professionally speaking, each psychologist has their kind of branch or the area of speciality. And for clinical psychologists, in most part, it's kind of using psychological theory and techniques to help people who have mental health and physical health problems. But you see clinical psychologists appearing in other fields as well, like in the criminal justice sphere, so trying to reduce recidivism, for example. So clinical psychology has been applied to a number of different contexts, away from the original kind of area of looking at treating mental health and psychological problems. Okay.
And you have shown dedication because you went on to do a PhD. You have published in several international peer-reviewed academic journals. You've got 20 years experience working with clients in the public, private and corporate organizations. So you really have gone on, you've continued your education, your training. And that's reflected because you're a member of several professional bodies, UK Health and Care Professionals Council, the British Psychological Society, the International Society for Coaching Psychology. There's a lot there. And it goes into more about what you've been trained in as well. And I would say quite a lot of people would have heard of most of these things, but you're trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, acceptance and commitment theory, and others, it says. I know I've underlined something else, which I hadn't heard of before. So I'll find out about what that is, because that's intrigued me. I wonder if I can find it now. What does it say? It says something compassionate, something.
Oh, compassion-focused therapy.
Yes, that is. I thought, well, I've not heard of that. That is one I've not heard of before. Maybe you could just briefly explain what each of those is.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in a nutshell, we have a number of different approaches to treating or looking to address all sorts of kind of psychological and medical issues, behavioural problems, that sort of thing. And so what you're talking about, there's these different kind of schools or different kind of approaches to intervening with these issues, and that they're based on certain assumptions, different assumptions often, and have different kind of techniques to practically actually use with people to help them with their difficulties or achieve their goals. So a lot of people have heard of CBT, or cognitive behaviour therapy.
Yeah.
So that's a really common one, and a lot of clinical psychologists and other kind of therapists, particularly in the UK and other countries, are trained in CBT. So basically, it's a way of addressing problems that says your thoughts are quite important to psychological and emotional problems you have, as well as other things. But that's one of the key kind of distinguishing characteristics of CBT. It's looking at the role of thoughts and how we can identify kind of problematic or inaccurate thoughts, and then respond to them in an effective, kind of more positive way, adaptive way. Yeah. And so you've got mindfulness, which has been very popular in recent years, and a lot of people have heard about mindfulness as well. And I think there's similarities between mindfulness and acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, that you mentioned. And in contrast to CBT, they'll approach kind of thoughts in a different way, saying instead of tackling and trying to modify thoughts head on, let's just kind of step back and kind of observe them and kind of unhook from them, so we don't get tied up in unhelpful responses to those thoughts when they happen. Acceptance and commitment therapy also works on slightly different kind of theory or assumptions about why people develop psychological problems, compared to CBT. So you've got some, similarities and differences between a lot of these major approaches, but along with other clinical psychologists tend to focus on approaches that have some kind of evidence base or some, scientific kind of support for their effectiveness. And that's certainly something we try and use in the Flexible Man project as well. Okay.
And what was that last thing I was compassionate? What was it? Sorry.
Compassion focused therapy.
What was that one? Yeah. What was that one?
Yeah. Well, compassion focused therapy is something I've got a lot of value out of using, and so I've coupled my colleagues like Matt Beedman, who's my Flexible Masculinity co-founder. So basically, compassion focused therapy looks at psychological problems in terms of the need to acknowledge some inevitable truths about our brains and our lives. That, for example, our brains have these inbuilt alarm systems, and they're there whether you want them or not. So most people have heard of the fight or flight response. And these kind of processes are hardwired into our brains, but often we'll beat ourselves up or give ourselves a hard time for these things happening. So, I shouldn't have let that situation get to me, or I shouldn't have got upset or scared or anxious in that situation. But really what we're doing is kind of fighting very natural, unavoidable things that go on in our bodies and our brains. And so this is one of the useful things about compassion focused therapy. It's getting people to kind of acknowledge the fact that, hey, these things are inevitable. So you need to kind of go easy on yourself, because it's kind of a waste of your energy to fight or disagree or beat yourself up for something that is going to happen whether you like it or not.
Okay.
But that's only a part of compassion focused therapy. And there's loads of techniques within that gives us different ways to kind of relate to ourselves in a more kind of compassionate way. So we're kind of working, we're fighting our own corner rather than being our own worst enemy.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I suppose in general, just being kinder with yourself, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really simple idea, but potentially it's a really powerful idea. Because, I mean, I see a lot of people in my practice who come in with difficulties, and they're difficulties that are partly kind of driven by a tendency to be very harsh and self-critical, shaming of yourself. Often people do that as a way to try and, change their behavior, improve their performance, whatever kind of sphere that is. But actually it undermines them. But, you get so locked into these types of responses that you don't take the time to step back and say, well, actually, is this kind of working in the way that I want it to? Or am I just kind of on this autopilot where I'm making these responses or using these strategies that ultimately are self-defeating?
Okay. I think I've had a bit of acceptance and commitment theory, but it's about a decade now, because I've got a neck issue, chronic pain. And my sort of understanding of it was perhaps in detriment to the process, because I thought, let me get this right. There's a part of it, things that I accept, and a part of the things that I will never accept as being different than what they are. So, for example, it will never be okay with me that at certain times I have not being able to work to sustain myself in terms of food and warmth. That will never be okay with me, let alone, live in the house I want, go on a couple of holidays a year. At that point will never be okay. Well, I'll never really accept that. But then I'm thinking, okay, is it that part I need to accept, or is it the part where I think, okay, almost another level up, where I say, okay, that's never going to be okay with me. But I can accept that it will never be okay with me. Do you know what I mean? Okay, that's bad. And even if I reframe it, so even if I say, I would never be in the position now where I teach yoga, which I love. I do podcasts. I'm loving it. Even if I reframe it, and there are some good things that have come out of this situation of me having chronic neck pain. Even if I reframe it, this part I will never accept, but I can accept that I won't accept some parts. And the important part is that I move on in ways that I can with my life. So I accept that part. Is that, have I got that right? Is there more elements of that? Because people are going to, with the difficult situations like that, people are going to think, I am not gonna, there's no way I'll accept this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we have with acceptance and commitment therapy is this idea that life is not all roses, and everyone experiences difficulties, challenges, really awful stuff. And what we're trying to do with ACT, with acceptance and commitment therapy, is say, okay, with that stuff there that you can't avoid, it's going to be part of your life. How do you still live life in a way that's kind of consistent with your values? And so it's known as a behavioural therapy, ACT, where it's very much focused on, in spite of all this nastiness and horribleness, you know, what stuff that you can be doing that's taking you in the direction of your kind of a desired or kind of valued life. So actors can be a really useful approach for things like chronic pain, because the problem is the pain, and that's not something you can change. So it's about having a mindset where say, okay, I accept that that's there and I can't change that. But, you know, even with that there, let's look at stuff I still can do in my life that's important or valued to me.
Yeah. So is it in a way a commitment to a kind of maybe a different path in life than what you may have had before? Is that?
Yeah, it's commitment to that kind of goals, values-based behaviour. So it's kind of not losing sight of the fact that I have these values, these things are important to me in life, and no matter what nastiness is going on, you know, how can I still move towards those values, or have those values-based behaviours as part of my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. And you say you support to clients facing challenges in two broad areas. So general psychological and mental health issues. And a big area is psychological and adjustment issues in people with medical conditions and or disabilities. We've just touched on that, haven't we? Also, your coaching. You can help with procrastination. I do my best cleaning sometimes and tidying when I'm procrastinating. Goal setting and achievement, optimizing performance at work, stress management, poor self-confidence, enhancing well-being. That all sounds great. And you're really at the top of your game because you're also a registered supervisor and experienced researcher. And your blogs, actually, that really comes through in your blogs. They're very nicely researched and laid out, and look at some big concept as well. So you're not just saying statements. Some of the blogs I had to reread as you do with concepts, you know, to kind of run through different scenarios in your head about this concept that you've read about. So it's really in depth, really nice. So, and you have, which is a big thing for you, your Flexible Man project. But just before we get into that, I just want to make sure we've kind of gone over what the, you know, generally you help with as well. You do emphasize the down-to-earth and practical approach that works. You go into how it can be delivered. I think we've touched on that, haven't we? Like workshops, etc. Come back to Flexible Man. Yes, so I think we've touched on everything before launching into Flexible Man project. Would you like to say a little bit about that, and we'll just pick up on little bits of things about it?
Yeah, sure. So the Flexible Man project. So I've co-founded this initiative with Matthew Beedman, another coaching and clinical psychologist. We, being men, we tend to see a lot of men in our practice, because often we get hunted down by blokes looking to talk to other blokes, basically. And so we tend to see a lot of men in our kind of coaching and in our clinical work. And off the back of publishing some research around men's coping, I became more and more interested in how men approach psychological challenges in their lives. Okay. And we thought that there was a real need to put a service out there that was very kind of practically focused. I think there's been, very encouragingly, a lot more talk around men communicating about psychological distress, about mental health problems, and saying, you know, it's okay to talk, basically. And that is an important part of the process, but also, you know, communication takes skills, practical skills, as well as tackling psychological difficulties takes skills. So we're very much focused on the practical skills side of things, to use our kind of expertise in our coaching and clinical practices to actually support men to take on psychological challenges more successfully, so that they can live better lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's in the media a lot, isn't it? This issue of men going for help, getting the right help, and often you see the man being kind of pushed into going to get help and things like this. You can find on this Flexible Man project, you've got a one-day skills-based workshop for men wanting to enhance their resilience to psychological distress. Yeah, you've mentioned that. You could also offer bespoke training program to tackle common male mental health issues that are prevalent within an industry or organisation. Yeah, because specific industries will have, I can see that more specific issues. Now, you speak on your website about, this phrase, man up. And I think people of our generation understand that that's not perhaps the thing you should say to someone, anyone, man, woman, anyone. So, and you touch on toxic masculinity. What does man up imply, and how do you get past that?
Yeah. So for us, man up implies following a fairly specific kind of brand of masculinity, if you like, that is along the lines of some fairly kind of, traditional, historical, kind of often white Western kind of concepts about masculinity and what it is and what it isn't. Basically, we talk about masculinities because there's lots of different versions of masculinity. There's this man up phrase, I think, refers to a version of masculinity that's pretty unhelpful when we are looking at promoting our kind of physical and psychological health. So it's about kind of ignoring, concealing distress and difficulties. It's about projecting an image of kind of, toughness and independence, that sort of thing. And it's as I said, it's pretty unhelpful when certain problems come along, like psychological distress, like low mood or depression, for example, when that approach actually isn't going to work in helping you address and make some progress with that issue. So in terms of overcoming like a man up brand of masculinity, what we do with Flexible Man Project is say, there's no real right or wrong way to kind of do masculinity or kind of represent masculinity. Instead, we say, take the brand that's important to you and look to have it as flexible or as expansive as possible. So we might take a characteristic like bravery, for example, if that's particularly important to you in your own kind of brand or conceptualization of masculinity. And we say, well, let's take bravery and think about all the different ways in which that can be kind of displayed or exhibited as a bloke. So it might be standing up to a bully at work or in school if you're younger, through to speaking honestly to someone who's likely to disagree with the opinion you have, or going against the grain by behaving in a way that would be at odds with your group of friends and how they might respond in a certain situation. So it's saying there's no right or wrong way to do masculinity. There's no right or wrong version. The problems come when you adopt a version of masculinity that's very narrow and restrictive and kind of cuts down your options for coping with psychological distress when that distress comes about. So this is why this man up approach is not helpful, because it's very kind of restricted. It says there's a very particular way to do masculinity in that kind of context. And it means that your options shut down and you become less effective at coping with challenges that come along in life.
And I like the analogy you use about a car and first gear, because I think it's obviously important to recognize that there is some occasion, and typically that would be a temporary response in a crisis, where you would adopt a sort of strategy of, okay, let's just ignore these thoughts and feelings for the moment. I've got to get on with this right now. Excuse me. But then, much like a car, if you stay in first gear, your engine is going to suffer. And there has to be more gears, more strategies for you to look at your emotions and feelings. Is that about right?
You know, absolutely. And I think I haven't really come across many coping strategies that you could clearly label as good or bad. I think the problem is when people kind of overuse or over rely on a particular strategy. And so if you buy into a brand of masculinity that's very tight and very restrictive around the sorts of behaviors you can do and can't do, then that's going to get you into trouble. So if you're feeling distressed, you're feeling anxious, going and having a pint with a couple of friends at a pub may be perfectly fine, you know, if you do it kind of now and again. But if every single night that's your response to feeling distressed, then you're going to get into trouble. So yeah. I think we should be more concerned or interested in overused strategies and not having a variety of strategies, rather than saying, oh, okay, that's good and that's bad, as a coping response. So again, this is where this flexible masculinity we think is really important, because it's saying, let's have as broad a set of tools as possible. So then you can take a horses for courses approach, basically, and say, well, in one situation I might use strategy A, another situation I might use strategy B, and that also helps me avoid getting into a situation where I'm just hammering one type of coping response over and over and over again, and it's meaning that I'm less effective than I could be at managing distress. Okay.
Mm-hmm. There's also a mention of, which I kind of quite like, and I can't find it now, but you mentioned like a sort of exercise where you just go and live your life for a few days without any ideas of what you should be, or what your ideas are of what you should be, that is to do with your gender, that in your case is sort of masculinity. So as an experiment, drop all those ideas. How do you live? How does it change? That just intrigued me. I kind of applied it to myself. I wonder if I can live a few days and drop my ideas of what my feminine ideas, or I just found it really interesting. Yeah, the kinds of things you would discover.
It's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? Because you know, I think identity is such a broad kind of concept and involves a lot, not just your kind of gender identity or gender roles, but it is, you know, a significant part of it. And it is a useful kind of experiment, I guess, taking a characteristic that's important to you, you know, like this bravery idea I go back to, and saying, well, instead of showing or displaying bravery and with method A, let's try and do it with kind of method B and just kind of see what that's like. So as a little kind of everyday behavioral experiment, if you like, and because having a different experience is a really can be a very powerful teacher. You know, rather than staying in our heads all the time going, I wonder what it would be like if I did X, actually going and practically trying something and see what actually happens in the real world. Often that's a far more kind of powerful experience and something we can learn a lot more from.
Yeah. I'm definitely gonna do that experiment myself. You've sort of touched on this another idea of sort of taking a stock take of existing views on masculinity, and coping with ideas. That's what you have touched on that, and that can work for you, or how it may be working against you, I guess. There was a blog that I thought was quite interesting, and it touches on what I was saying before about sort of getting a man in through the doors to help him in the first place, maybe, and they perhaps typically don't like to ask for help. And you were talking about the two words, stress and depression, and how you would use different words, perhaps, to sort of get a man in through the door to that help stage. And I read this and immediately knew what you were saying, even though it doesn't actually say in black and white in the blog. Just because, I mean, obviously stress and depression are literally mean two different things, but it wasn't that you were talking about. You were talking about what goes around the word stress and around the word depression. And this is what my interpretation is, that you would probably use the word stress, talk about stress to a man rather than depression, because to me, stress is more of a powerful word. It means I might be important. I've got a lot of things to do. There's only me who can do them. It's also an external thing to me that I perhaps need to take control of. So it's a very much more powerful word for one to think about oneself having, as opposed to depression. Because now, to me, that word has more of a meaning of my inner self. I'm not tackling something going on inside myself. I must be weak. How can I tackle this? It must be my fault. And also, so it's not an external thing. It's within you. It's your fault. And I thought it was really, really interesting, really, really interesting. And it's also, I found it really interesting that I had picked that up so quickly. And then I thought, has this sort of toxic masculinity kind of spread, not throughout men, but throughout women? That's what I kind of thought, is this what's going on within me that I think that? Is it society? Well, maybe. Or is it to do with just my personality? Maybe I'm just that way more inclined. Or there was a third thing I thought about. Or could it be that in the past I've simply been more stressed than depressed? So one of them three things, or perhaps a mixture of all of them, is happening. But I just found it really interesting that you would use different words for men. Do you want to expand on that? And I think you did mention, as soon as you as they come in to help, you start perhaps using the more accurate words.
Yeah, so I think, I think that blog you're referring to, I was kind of talking about the use of language or modifying men to try and get them through the door, basically, to get some help. Because as an entire group, men are kind of notoriously low, poor help seekers. Not everyone, but on average as a group, less likely to seek help than women. And one of the responses to this is say, well, what kind of language do we use? How do we kind of, quote unquote, market mental health or psychological services to men to make them more appealing? And one of the strategies that's been talked about a lot, say, well, let's think about our language. Let's modify our language in a way that's less kind of stigmatizing, or a bit more kind of acceptable to men. But I think there's a trap there. If we start to modify, we say on the one hand it's okay to talk, but on the other hand, service providers of various kinds are saying are being seen to modify or try and soften the language, then I think you could be sending very conflicting messages there. So if it's okay to talk about having depression, for example, then, let's talk about depression. Let's not come up with a kind of modified or euphemistic kind of term through fear of kind of alienating or getting men running off screaming for the hills. I think, it needs to be used quite carefully, and certainly not in a way where you might risk confusing men by saying, on the one hand, you must talk, why won't you talk? But at the same time, the people who are there to help us are saying, oh, well, you look a bit stressed, when really someone's kind of clinically depressed or has some other issue. So I think it's important to think about that and talk about where the boundary lies, or what's a seemingly good balance between the two. I think once you get a guy in the front door and you're working with him, then I think it can be a really useful strategy to get him to drive the language that he wants to use, provided it's not kind of contributing to kind of avoidance of important kind of facts or home truths about someone's situation. So yeah, the use of language is quite an interesting and important kind of topic, but you've got these tensions within that around how you use language that could that could send mixed messages potentially, but also have a bit of an impact around what proportion of men do actually come in and say, I need a bit of extra assistance here.
And would you say that and perhaps this isn't something you've thought about before, because maybe your focus is on the Flexible Man project and coming at it from that angle, but because it really made me think, is this, I don't know, idea of masculinity reaching us women in a similar way? Particularly, I thought about the roles of, or typical roles of gender changing, and the women are now more, of them are going out to work, more of them are being the primary breadwinner. And I just thought, are women kind of being affected in this way, do you think? Or
yeah. I guess you talk to a few different people, you're always going to get a wide range of experiences. I guess if we think about kind of masculinity, femininity, gender roles, that's just one of the many kind of pressures put on us in our identity, and an expectation that we're going to think, feel, and behave in a particular way. So gender roles is just one example of that. So, we talk a lot about masculinities and Flexible Man project, but for men as well as for women, there are other factors that are going to place pressure on you to, be a certain person or have a certain role in life. So I think regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, no matter what kind of situation you find yourself in life, there's going to be expectations and kind of pressures to live your life in a certain way, and they come from various sources. So and over time, I think these expectations and influences change, don't they? And the goalposts kind of keep moving. And I think while it's been good to try and tell men, it's okay to talk, times are changing, we're not like the previous, our parents' generation, that's all well and good, but it just means that what we're kind of supposed to be seems to keep kind of changing. So that's why I think kind of flexibility is a really good kind of concept to use in life, because it's not about you should be this, it's about have a variety of different kind of strategies, have an open and kind of critical mind, and don't be afraid to change your approach, change how you perceive things over time, because that's the reality of life, that life changes, and the way we kind of view people and expectations we have within society are always evolving.
Yeah, and Do you know another thing that sort of popped up in my mind as I was reading some of your blogs is that I wonder if a higher level of challenge is there for different classes or for different sets of people, perhaps with a lower amount of money. And I say this because we were talking earlier about first gear, and would a person adopt more of a first gear approach if that person thought that or knew that they couldn't have time off work to deal with the issues effectively because they need to put food on the table? They can't afford to access the correct help or to work through these things. So they're operating more in a sort of crisis mode for more of the time. Do you think that, or do you any evidence?
No, I think there's lots of circumstances in life where we feel kind of constrained or forced into a certain course of action or a certain way of approaching life or dealing with difficulties, sources of stress, that sort of thing. I mean, I've quite a bit of experience as a carer, and I think that when times were tough and overwhelming, I was often telling myself, I have no choice but to kind of keep going. I can't let this get to me. I can't get too emotional. I can't kind of get upset. So I think we're often placed in life circumstances where there's real pressure or kind of expectation, whether it's imposed by ourselves or by others, to respond or act in a certain way. I think that's definitely something that everyone can relate to.
Yeah. There's quite a few. I was getting, really into all your blogs. I recommend go and have a look at your blogs. We've spoken about Man Up and about those emotional signals, and they can be helpful to stop or change what you're doing or steer in a different way, maybe. We've spoken about the class issues. What Man Up might mean, reframing things, like in terms of bravery, what could that mean? Talked about the first gear. I think Watch Your Language. There's another one called Watch Your Language. I think that's where you look at stress versus depression, isn't it? And use of the different words. So how can, is it the Flexible Man Project? Is it, can you get it on the NHS, or is it a private thing, or?
Yeah, no, we're a private service. We are kind of in the process of collaborating with other organisations to provide some sort of input. But I think that the main kind of service that we offer for people is one-to-one support, and we do a lot of that online. So we work with people all over, like the UK and around the world, to help them effectively respond to whatever challenge it is that they bring along. So that one-to-one work is quite a focus. But we also do these one-day resiliency workshops. And we're just in the process of getting a version of that put online so people can kind of access it as a self-guided workshop. So we basically try and weave in the flexible masculinity kind of approach into all those different kind of services that we offer. So regardless of whether you're getting the one-on-one help or you're doing the online workshop, we try and really carry that idea that the way forward with psychological distress or psychological difficulties is to develop flexibility in your thinking, feeling and behaviour, and to say that we're not here to tell men how they should be as men. Rather, let's get alongside of you. Let's see how you currently cope with difficult psychological kind of situations and see how we can kind of expand that out and develop that further. So taking, a guy's existing skills and looking to kind of grow them rather than saying you've got to go in a completely different direction. I think it's a really nice way to work with people. And it's an important way to work with people, whether, you're working with men or women, is to say, well, everyone has their existing kind of strengths and abilities and knowledge. Let's actually use that as a base, rather than kind of, intentionally not giving the message that, people coming in as a blank slate or don't have anything to work with.
Okay. I think it's really great, isn't it, that we can work with people in different parts of the country and different parts of the world with the technology now. Is there any blogs or anything you think is important, whether that would, generally male or female, or focusing on men, that you'd like to bring up, would like to mention, or?
Yeah, well, we've got more kind of information resources on our website, so that's flexibleman.com, and so some of the blogs you referred to are posted on there. So men and women can go and have a bit of a read there and see, get some more information. When we write articles and blogs, we try and keep them practically focused. So actually giving people some useful information and strategies that they can kind of take away from them. So that's an important thing for us. But there's loads of good resources out there, no matter where you are in the world. For example, a really good source of useful blogs is something like Psychology Today. You've got blogs on a whole range of topics there. Whatever country you're in, that that the National kind of Psychological Organisation is often a good source of information resources. So in the UK, it's the British Psychological Society. In the States, you've got the American Psychological Society. So there are a lot of really good resources out there. I think if you're trying to seek information on psychological mental health issues, it's really crucial that you go to a reputable source, because thousands, not millions of people writing on mental health issues, and I think you've got to get good quality information so you don't head down the wrong track around how to kind of respond or cope with these difficulties. So I think starting with these well-known reputable bodies is a really good way to go, to make sure that you're not, you don't get some information that's potentially going to be unhelpful to you or been inaccurate or lead you down an unfortunate path.
Okay. So you've mentioned there your Flexible Man website. You've also got your own personal website, haven't you? Now, what's that?
Yeah, so that's jasonspendelow.com. So if you just Google me, my name will come up for my website and Flexible Man Project, because I do a combination of this coaching and clinical work. So working with people who have medical conditions, that's kind of one area of my practice, and then the more kind of coaching work, working with men, that's more the Flexible Man Project.
Okay, and you're also on LinkedIn. I'm just going to spell your surname. It's Spendelow.
Nailed it. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, that's the spelling.
It's a bit tricky to spell as well as pronounce, as you found out.
Yeah. Okay, so I always ask this question: what makes life sublime for you?
For me, what makes life sublime are people. And I'm very lucky to have some wonderful friends and family. And, if I think about the best moments in my life, they've always been, with people, or having experience with, loved ones or people who are kind of precious to me. So I'm incredibly spoiled, incredibly lucky in my life. So it's really, for me, it's about people, and that's what makes my life particularly sublime.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's a really nice ending. I've absolutely loved speaking to you, and I've loved looking through your website and your blogs. So if Fritz is a Blind Life, we are on most social media platforms. We're now on YouTube because these podcasts are being started to be visually recorded as well. So you can hit subscribe, and I think you have to hit a bell thing for it to send you a note when a new one comes up. So you can do that. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure I'll speak to you again at some point in the future. Thank you, and see everybody next time.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Hayley.
Thank you.